in 2008. You know what? I don't want to do the usual intro this time. I'm way too pumped for this episode. Richard, roll that intro music. That's what I'm talking about. Hello, welcome to a new and very special episode of Waiting in the Sky with TJ Starman. I'm very excited about this multi-part special for basically the collision of two worlds here. We are going to be looking at the DC Extended Universe. That is this recent collection of modern DC superhero films. We're talking Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, all of those. But we're going to be looking at it through the lens of Kevin. So if you watch She-Hulk, which is the latest Disney Plus Marvel show, they had a little bit of fun in the finale here. And I won't spoil, I guess, too much besides the fact that they play on the Marvel formula. They kind of went head on with it and just addressed it. And so within this continuity of She-Hulk, we meet this robot called Kevin. It's an abbreviation. I'm not going to get into it because I don't remember it is the primary reason. But the implication is that Kevin is responsible for creating the Marvel Cinematic Universe as it exists. Obviously, this is a play on Kevin Feige, who is the executive producer that has his hands in all of the MCU. But it did get me thinking, especially after walking out at the conclusion. I shouldn't just say walking out of the theater after watching all of Black Adam recently. What would the DCEU, the DC Extended Universe, look like if it was created by Kevin, aka Marvel Studios? And so that is the basis of this multi-part episode here. And I'm very excited about it because I absolutely love superheroes. I love superhero movies. If you have listened to any of my reviews or any of the superhero centric episodes that we have done in the past, this is no surprise to you. And I'm very excited to be diving deep into the world of both Marvel and DC here with this very special setup. As I've mentioned a few times now, I am going to be breaking this episode up into multiple parts. The reason for that is I really just wanted this to be very easily digestible. So if you are listening on a podcast app, if you are watching on YouTube, I really wanted this to be something that you could pop in and out of. We've explored longer episodes with chapters and things like that in the past, but I really just want to experiment a little bit more here and try to actually break this up into multiple parts. So excited to try out that formula. Please let me know what you think about it. Rate and review, leave that in the comments if you're listening on the podcast, and definitely, leave it in the comments on YouTube if you're watching as well. I really appreciate it. So this part one is going to be tackling essentially the DCEU's phase one. So if you're familiar with the way that Marvel has broken down its Marvel Cinematic Universe, all of those big Marvel Avengers movies that you've seen, the TV shows as well, you'll know that they kind of broke it up into what they refer to as phases. So we get phase one. Phase one was with the introduction of Iron Man all the way through the Avengers in 2012. Then we got phase two, which followed up right after the Avengers with Iron Man 3, went through to Ant-Man, technically. So they broke it up into those different phases, and it's basically just a way to kind of look at different story arcs and the way that they all kind of interact and intertwine. And obviously we got the Infinity Saga, which was a compilation of phases 1, 2, and 3 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. If it sounds like a bunch of gibberish that I'm speaking right now, that's totally fine. It mostly is. And it's really just for those deep nerds like myself, and maybe some of you listening as well, that really get into this stuff and can really understand what is being broken down and presented to us all the time. And so don't feel bad if that went over your head. It's totally fine. But it makes a lot of sense to break up these episodes in a similar fashion. So since we're going to be looking at Marvel Studios' version of the DCEU, we're going to be looking at it through these different phases. So each episode is going to tackle a different phase. So phase 1, 2, 3, and then we're currently within phase 4 of the MCU. So we're going to be tackling the DCEU through Marvel Studios up until this current point. So up until where we're at with the MCU. And I think I'm going to forecast it just a little bit with what we've seen announced, at least through Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. Maybe we'll go a little bit further. I'm not sure. We just got the Quantumania trailer today as I'm recording this, so it might be good to include that one as well, but I might have to do a little bit more work to add that one in there. Before I get into the actual movies themselves that I have outlined here, I do want to just kind of lay some of the groundwork, the ground rules, I should say, and the expectations for this series as a whole, for this multi-part special here. I'm going to be essentially just replacing each Marvel movie with a DC movie to build the DCEU within the Marvel formula. For example, because I'm going to talk about this in 2 seconds, well, that's an exaggeration, but because I'm going to be talking about this soon, in place of Iron Man in 2008, we're going to be looking at Batman. And so it's kind of just fitting the DC characters and the DC universe within the infrastructure that Marvel Studios has established already. So that's what you can expect from these episodes. You can also expect largely kind of surface level breakdown of these movies that I'm pitching here. I am a fan of both Marvel and DC. I'm not as well versed in a lot of the DC storylines, to be totally honest with you. So I did do a little bit of research here, digging where I could to see, what stories from the comics could really work for movies. Also looking at the existing movies that we already have from DC and seeing, what could maybe fit here, what could fit there, that type of thing. But what I did not do for this is write an entire series of movies. I definitely do not have the ability to do that. I did try my hand at writing some very, very, very brief post-credit scenes. So I'm excited to share some of those as well. But if you're expecting me to create all of these movies from scratch, I am very sorry to disappoint you. That's not going to be happening here. So you're essentially going to be getting a little bit of a breakdown on why this movie is taking place, where it is, the story inspirations. I'm going to hit on some important story beats if there's important things I want to note taking place within this entry in a movie. Going to touch on the characters that are involved. I think the characters within comics and within these comic book movies are so important. So I definitely want to mention what characters are going to be making appearances within each of these movies. And then I already touched on it already, but I am going to also share my post-credit scenes, because post-credit scenes became so synonymous with Marvel and with the MCU that this is a very important part of their formula. So I have drafted up post-credit scenes that fit within that mold, that fit within that formula of the MCU, and applied it to the DC characters as well. That's about all I have as far as the groundwork goes. And I know I'm saying that like it wasn't a lot, but if you're still here with me, buckle up. We're in for a ride, because I had so much fun doing this, and I hope that you really enjoy what I have worked out here for you all. So I already hinted at it. We're going to take a look at the movie that's going to be taking the place of Iron Man from 2008. And I'll also mention the timeline. I have this timeline set up. The DCEU officially began with Man of Steel in 2013. So in this alternate universe that I'm creating here, that I'm outlining, the DCEU is beginning in 2013 the same way it did, but it's going to follow this Marvel formula that we've already seen laid out. So you can also pretend like the MCU doesn't exist, I guess, in this alternate universe. And you can also pretend that the modern DC movies do not exist, both the DCEU. I would also extend this to like the Dark Knight trilogy. The other thing too is I'm not going to be casting these movies. I'm going to be filling it with characters, but I'm not going to be specifically calling out actors portraying these characters. So if you have your personal favorite that you would see within this role, within this storyline, by all means, let me know who you would cast in that role. But I'm not going to worry about that. For our purposes, just identifying the character alone should suffice. So again, I already teased you enough. Let's get into it officially now. In 2013, for the very first entry in this Marvel Studios DCEU, is going to be Batman. So obviously Batman is a very strong character to be starting out the DC extended universe with. Batman also parallels the character of Iron Man in a very interesting way, both being superheroes that are obviously very wealthy, and they don't actually have superpowers. Their powers are from like their intellect, but their means and the resources that they have and the way that they put these into action. So I do think that Batman is a fairly good substitute here to play that Tony Stark Iron Man role as Bruce Wayne / Batman. For this movie, I do want this to be a very sort of origin story light for Batman. Obviously, everyone knows Batman's origin story, so I want to kind of abbreviate that a little bit. But story inspirations, I think I'm going to be looking at Batman Begins from Christopher Nolan as part of the Dark Knight trilogy. Specifically, the way that they give his origin, his parents' story, sure, but also the way that he was training with the League of Assassins, is a very interesting aspect of that movie that I think could fit here. From the Batman, the recent movie as well in 2022, the villain I'm going to be taking from that movie, as well as the more focus on the detective aspect of Batman. I think that's a very good place to start. And so I really want to emphasize that in this character of Batman, this version of Batman. And then from the comics, obviously Batman Year One, I think makes a lot of sense. You get kind of this look at a more novice version of Batman that is really building his processes. He's building his persona and everything from the ground up. And so I think incorporating elements from all of those to really build this sort of Batman getting his start story, which all three of these already kind of have that twisted into what the story that they're telling. I think if you kind of combine them all, you could get a really fresh take on a Batman origin story here. Shifting gears to characters, obviously you're going to have Bruce Wayne / Batman. You're going to have Alfred, of course. I'm bringing back Rachel Dawes from Batman Begins. I really liked the way that she was this childhood friend of Bruce's that can kind of see him as the boy he used to be and then the man that he becomes. And so I really like that aspect. I'd like to see her incorporated into this universe, this version of Batman as well. Detective Gordon is going to be super crucial in any Batman story, so he's going to be there as well. And then for the villain, I touched on it already, but I really like the idea of the Riddler, aka Edward Nygma. That of the version that we saw within the Batman, I think is fine. I think you could, downplay the serial killer kind of creepiness a little bit to make it more of that family-friendly approach that we know Marvel is a big fan of. I think you could definitely do that, and so I'd be fine with that. But I really like the idea of the Riddler as that counterpart to Batman in his detective, in sort of his detective mode that we saw from the Batman movie. And I think that really worked, and I'd like to keep that rolling. As far as story beats, nothing, really important jumps out at me that needs to happen here. It's just going to be a, very personal Batman origin story and just going to focus on Batman, the character himself, until the post-credit scene. So the first post-credit scene in this version of the DCEU, Bruce has bested the Riddler and sent him to Arkham Asylum. He's visibly pained as he steps up from in front of his computer in the proto-Batcave. Alfred comes to assist him, informing Bruce that they have a visitor. "I'm in no shape for guests, Alfred," says Bruce. "I made the same argument, Master Wayne, but I'm afraid she was very persistent." "She?" asks Bruce as they emerge into the foyer of the Wayne mansion. Standing there is Amanda Waller. "Mr. Wayne, I believe it's time we become acquainted." So boom, right off the bat, you're going to follow this Marvel formula. You get the, the billionaire playboy who is a superhero, becomes a superhero, and has his very own, first adventure that's very much focused on his storyline. But at the end, we're going to get a tease that this is part of something bigger here. And of course, Amanda Waller makes a lot of sense as the Nick Fury stand-in. So to have that character be the one that's approaching Batman here the same way that Nick Fury approaches Iron Man at the end of that movie. And that post-credit scene, I think, was a very natural way to connect the dots here and made a lot of sense. Of course, Iron Man was not the only movie in the MCU to come out in 2008, and so Batman will not be the only movie to come out in 2013 as part of this DCEU. Taking the place of the Incredible Hulk is going to be Aquaman. That's right, I went with Aquaman as the second character that's going to be introduced, second big hitter that's going to be introduced in this version of the DCEU. I think it makes a lot of sense. Aquaman is a very powerful character, a very, well-known character, but is maybe not a character that a lot of people have this like really strong attachment to. And obviously we know that there's not a whole lot of the Hulk as far as like solo outings. So I think it kind of makes a lot of sense to parallel Aquaman with the Incredible Hulk here. And as far as the story goes, I liked the Aquaman movie that we got. I think that would work here. I would maybe just kind of trim it a little bit to make it more of an intimate story focusing on Black Manta and his quest for revenge, as opposed to the whole Ocean Master and like who is next in line to rule Atlantis type of story that we ended up getting in that movie. I would keep this much more self-contained and not seem quite as grand as that movie paints, I think, for the second entry here. So the characters that would fall within that story is going to be Arthur Curry / Aquaman. I think Mara could play a similar role here. It would not be Amber Heard, obviously. Tom Curry, Arthur's father, would be a part of this as well. I don't think you necessarily need to have his mother within this storyline, because I think it can be very, like I said, self-contained, focused on Black Manta's storyline and just his lust for vengeance and the way that it basically puts him on a collision course with Aquaman. And so obviously the villain in this story is going to be David Kane / Black Manta. For the story beats, again, largely irrelevant this early on. So there isn't anything I really think has to play a part here just yet. The post-credit scene, I think this is fun because I just have here in my notes essentially the Aquaman recruitment scene in Justice League, where Bruce Wayne travels to the fishing village looking for Arthur. So, of course, the post-credit scene in The Incredible Hulk sees Tony Stark, that we now know as Iron Man, come in and talk to General Ross, who had been hunting the Incredible Hulk throughout the movie. And they just have a little bit of banter back and forth, basically just like, hey, I know you have a deal, or you have an issue with this guy who was a big green rage monster. And then General Ross is like, hey, I know that you are Iron Man. And so basically it's just this first like tease of two superhero movies being connected. And I think that's all we would really need here as well. And so I think, the way that Ben Affleck's character went to Ben Affleck's Batman went to this fishing village looking for Arthur Curry, Aquaman, in Justice League makes a lot of sense to fill this role. Next up is actually going to be our first sequel, and that is Batman 2, which will be taking place in 2015. It's going to be the substitute for Iron Man 2 within the DCEU here. For the story, I kind of like the idea of incorporating Robin at this point. We already had Batman and sort of saw him getting his start. And so I think it would make a lot of sense to incorporate Robin. We saw Rhodey step up to become War Machine in Iron Man 2. So I think that Robin can sort of fill those shoes a little bit here, bringing in that secondary character. I would go with, the introduction of Robin, something similar to what we saw in Batman Forever. Get your laughs in right now. But the way that they introduced an older version of Robin and, sort of had him be this kind of surrogate son to Bruce, but not literally, be like an adopted child like we've seen in the comics. I think it would make more sense to have Robin as an adult here at this point. So I think Batman Forever could kind of give you the inspiration there. And then I'm going to go back to Batman Begins because I really like the Scarecrow storyline in that movie. And I think that this could really play well into a sequel to a Batman movie where we've already kind of gotten to know who Batman is, who Bruce is, as a person and as a hero. So I really like the idea of adapting that into this sequel. The major characters that I would see folding into the sequel as well, obviously, still going to have Bruce Wayne Batman. You're going to have Alfred. I think Rachel could return in this one as well. Detective Gordon, I think, obviously, again, going to be there. Dick Grayson, Robin, I already touched on. Dinah Laurel Lance, aka Black Canary. I really like the idea of her being the Black Widow stand-in. Obviously, Black Widow was introduced in Iron Man 2, her first appearance, and then went on to be a mainstay in the MCU, a very important character. Eventually, after a long time, getting her own solo titled movie. And so Black Canary, I think, is a character very worthy of that type of, weight to be held on her shoulders. And I think that this would be a fun place to introduce her, because I'm not sure exactly how we would do it. I'm sure there's comic precedent somewhere if you are familiar with the storyline with Black Canary crossing over with Batman like this. Please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. Or you can also tweet at me at TJ Starman on Twitter, because I think this could be a lot of fun. Black Canary is a very largely grounded character. Her superpowers being, her very powerful voice, not being totally over the top. It's not dropping Superman in out of nowhere to be next to Batman here. I think you're introducing a little bit more of a grounded character that, again, I think can fit a lot of the role that Black Widow has throughout the MCU. And so I think is a very fitting character here. For the villain, I already mentioned Scarecrow. That's Jonathan Crane. I really like the way that this character utilizes fear as a weapon, and obviously he drugs his targets with fear gas and makes them envision, these images of terror. Some bullets that I have here in my notes for important story beats here. This is where the first time I really have a few things I really want to make sure get put in here. So Dinah has a personal vendetta against Scarecrow that's brought her to Gotham. So usually operating Star City is Star City. I was going to say Starling City, like the beginning of Arrow. But Star City, this personal vendetta against Scarecrow brings her out there. Maybe it has something to do with her father, who's a police officer. I'm not sure exactly. Like I said, I'm not going to write the whole movie, but that's what's brought Black Canary to Gotham. Scarecrow exploits Rachel and Robin as weaknesses to get a leg up on Batman. I think this is important because Batman is someone that is very much prone to working solo. So for him to get close to people and is not something that we see a whole lot. And I think as a younger Batman, not young, but someone who is, still kind of adapting and isn't at the peak of his powers, the peak of his superhero practices just yet. I think this makes some sense. So having Rachel and Robin as loved ones, as people close to him, exploited and kind of, his fear of losing them, preyed on by Scarecrow, I think really works here. So in response to that, Batman's going to isolate himself to try and protect them. So that's going to see Rachel going off on her own. She's no longer going to be involved with further movies. This is a good exit point for that character, in my opinion. So I'm going to use it. And then Robin is going to set off on his own to Bloodhaven. And this is going to hint at him becoming Nightwing. So when he was fighting alongside Batman, he was using the name Robin, but going off on his own, he's going to be, potentially using that Nightwing moniker. So Batman bests Scarecrow. We see him isolating himself at the end of this movie, and then we get our post-credit scene. We see a computer screen as it appears to be accessing an Argus database. It becomes obvious that it's being hacked, and a search is run, bringing up World War I historical data. Steve Trevor is typed out, and a biography of the pilot with information on his death appears on screen. The user deletes the data entry, and the camera pans over to see Diana Prince with a pained look on her face. Diana Prince is, of course, the alias of Wonder Woman. So this is going to be hinting at the next movie in the timeline here. Of course, at the end of Iron Man 2, we did get a post-credit scene hinting at Thor. And so Wonder Woman is the movie that's going to be taking place in 2016 as the substitute for Thor in the MCU. The story here is not inspired by, it's just going to be the Wonder Woman movie that we ended up getting. Just straight up, it's Wonder Woman. It's a good movie. Generally speaking, people really liked this. I did not see any reason to change it. It was a really good origin story, had really good, well thought out characters like Diana, aka Wonder Woman, the Amazons. You get Steve Trevor as the love interest, played by Chris Pine. You get Steve's crew that Wonder Woman is fighting alongside in the war. And of course, as a villain, you get the reveal of Ares, the god of war, as the villain in that movie. So pretty straightforward. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So we're going to just roll with that Wonder Woman movie as is. One thing I am going to change, though, is we are, of course, going to change the post-credit scene at the end of that movie. So in this post-credit scene, we're going to see Diana now working her museum job as depicted in Wonder Woman 84. She's packing up her work for the night as Amanda Waller enters her lab. "You shouldn't be here," says Diana. "I could say the same about you," replies Waller. "But I suppose you have your usefulness." Diana dismisses this, believing the comment to be about the lateness of the hour. "Have you brought an artifact for me to examine?" she asks. "As a matter of fact, I have. One you're particularly well suited to examine." An Argus agent emerges from behind Waller and opens a container to reveal our first look at a mother box. Now, of course, in the same year, following up Thor in 2011, we got Captain America, the First Avenger. And so, in the same year as Wonder Woman, we are going to be getting Superman, Dawn of Justice. That's right, I stole the subtitle from Batman v Superman. That is the only thing I'm going to be stealing from that movie in this case. But I really thought that it made a lot of sense. It parallels the First Avenger in a way that would set up Justice League. Spoiler alert, this is all leading up to Justice League. In the way that the First Avenger subtitle really hinted at heavily and led to the Avengers in 2012. So made a lot of sense. I like Superman, Dawn of Justice here. As far as the story for this one goes, I think that the Man of Steel storyline works as well. I'm not going to tweak it really too much. One thing I would add is that Jimmy Olsen is there now. Jimmy Olsen, Superman's pal from the comics. I think it makes sense for him to be there. He wasn't there in the original movie. They really didn't have a role for him. He did show up in Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. I believe it was confirmed that he was the reporter at the beginning of the movie. And so I'm going to just snatch him from that, and we're going to throw him into Man of Steel. For the full list of characters in that movie and in this one, we're going to have Clark Kent, aka Superman. We're going to have Lois Lane, of course. We're going to have Ma and Pa Kent, Perry White at the Daily Planet. We're going to have Jimmy Olsen as well to fill out that news team. And then the villains, we're going to carry over Feora and Zod, the Kryptonians that have come to Earth and will be clashing with the Man of Steel here. I think Man of Steel was a pretty good first Superman movie, and I think it works here. So I'm just going to kind of substitute it in where we had Captain America, the First Avenger, to kind of parallel that storyline and give the origin of this hero that is going to be very much the heart and soul of this super team that is coming up. No real story beats that I want to hit on for this one either, but I will talk about the post-credit scene. Clark and Lois are at the Kent farm in Smallville. As they lay together on the living room couch, Clark's face changes. Something's wrong. As Lois continues on in conversation, Clark steps up. He tells Lois to stay there as he steps outside the doors of the farmhouse. He's greeted by several Argus vehicles and agents led by Amanda Waller. "I expected you to be here to take me in sooner, and with more agents." "Reinforcements on the way?" asks Clark. "These agents aren't for you. And as far as reinforcements go, well, I'm hoping you can fill that role." This was the first real hurdle that I faced here because the post-credit scene at the end of Captain America is so unique to that situation. The fact that he was frozen in ice, was found and revived, and then like stepped foot out into modern day New York City to be greeted by Nick Fury. So I wanted to kind of parallel that here with, again, Amanda Waller in that Nick Fury role. But you don't have that unique situation. Like Superman, obviously, like this takes place in the modern day. He's not frozen in time and emerges and, needs to be explained what's going on here. So I kind of liked this twist of, he's been sitting there waiting for people to come for him, essentially believing that he almost did something wrong. Obviously there was a lot of destruction in the fight with Zod that's, played on in Batman v Superman. So maybe he's expecting there to be some repercussions from all of that. But I really like the idea that Amanda Waller, is bringing her agents, like they're on their way to go handle some stuff right now, but they know that they need a big heavy hitter, and Superman is where they've landed. I also really like this idea of Amanda Waller just knowing who all of these heroes are, despite what precautions they've taken to hide their identities, some better than others. I mean, Wonder Woman and Superman just change their hair and their clothes. Batman at least covers his face. But, I think that it's reasonable to believe that Amanda Waller could, discern who these people are and be able to put their identities together. Maybe she's just that plugged in. She has that much of like a grip on intelligence in general. This leads into the big culmination of phase 1. Of course, in place of Marvel's Avengers, we're going to be getting Justice League. Interestingly enough, the timeline would have it coming out in 2017. So still going to get Justice League in 2017 here. Now, I'm going to pull a little bit from what's already existed here. I'm going to pull a little bit from that Justice League movie that we ended up getting, specifically Steppenwolf and the Parademons. I think that this is a good parallel to Loki and the Chitauri army that he attacks New York with in the Avengers movie. So I think that kind of works as the villain there. I also think that you're going to take a lot of the general kind of storyline from Marvel's Avengers, the way that they have been teamed up by this government organization led by this, very confident, leader figurehead, Amanda Waller in this case in place of Nick Fury. And they're going to have to team up to fight against this, greater threat. And they're all people that have generally, not been in a team environment. They've been working solo most of their lives or entirely in their lives. And so I think another interesting wrinkle that you could have in there is that, Batman, having just had this experience of having his, people close to him used as targets as a vulnerability, he's definitely not going to be interested necessarily in teaming up. Superman is just kind of getting a grip on his own powers and abilities. He might be concerned that these people can't, keep up with him. Wonder Woman, I think in a similar way that we saw her kind of go into not hiding, but kind of, not taking an active role in a lot of conflict in the DCEU. I think we're going to get more of that here, and so she might be a little bit more resistant. And then Aquaman, I think it makes sense that he would also be more of a loner. I think like in the depiction that we've gotten from Jason Momoa's character as well, I think that works. It works a lot here. And maybe there's something in his story from his own movie that, maybe he's taken away from his interactions with Black Manta, and he doesn't want to, cause any kind of issues for other people, the collateral damage type of thing. So I already kind of went into it a little bit, but let's break down the characters here that are going to comprise our Justice League in this version of the DCEU. So Bruce Wayne / Batman, Arthur Curry / Aquaman, Diana Prince / Wonder Woman, Clark Kent / Superman. Of course, I already talked about how Black Canary is going to fill the Black Widow role. So Dinah Laura Lance in that role. And did you need a guy with a bow and arrow? Because guess what? We have a guy with a bow and arrow. So Oliver Queen slash Green Arrow is going to be filling the Hawkeye role, which I think also really makes a lot of sense because of the existing relationship with Black Canary and the way that those two have worked together. It makes a lot of sense to have them as partners, but you also get them as romantic love interests, which I think they played with the idea of that in the MCU. But I think you definitely can do this with Green Arrow and Black Canary in this version of the DCEU. So I really like that idea. You're going to have those 6 as your substitute for the original 6 Avengers in this movie. Of course, Amanda Waller is going to be that Nick Fury stand-in. And then I touched on the villains is going to be Steppenwolf primarily with his army of parademons. Some of the important story beats here. Again, it's going to largely parallel the story of Marvel's Avengers, but Steppenwolf is after the mother box that Argus possesses. The additional mother boxes, we know from the Justice League movie that there are 3. They are not yet known to the heroes, and Steppenwolf is really just focused on this one that Argus possesses. Batman plans to sacrifice himself in the final battle, much like Tony Stark does at the end of the Avengers. But having seen Steve Trevor do the same years earlier, Wonder Woman instead delivers the definitive blow, falling from the sky until she's eventually caught by Superman. Steppenwolf survives the final battle and disappears. This leads to our final post-credit scene of Phase 1. Steppenwolf walks through the fiery hall of Apocalypse towards an intimidating figure sitting athrone. Visibly terrified, Steppenwolf falls to his knees. As he begins to make his plea, a flash of red light stops him dead. As Steppenwolf's body falls to the ground, the camera pans up to Darkseid, whose frustration is visible. As it appears he will speak, the camera cuts to black. So obviously there's no I'll do it myself here, but at the end of the Avengers, that's when we first got that tease of Thanos. He picks up what is, I guess, a fake Infinity Gauntlet. And so I think you really needed to have that presence of the overarching villain here. And so Darkseid is going to fill that Thanos role naturally. And I think seeing him demonstrate his power and just ruthlessness to just eliminate Steppenwolf and his disappointment is something that works really well in the DCEU here that maybe Marvel was a little bit afraid to do right off the bat when they were still figuring things out. But I think that really sets how much of a threat this character is. And so I'd love to do that as the post-credit scene in the last shot of Phase 1 of Kevin's DCEU. And this is the very end of part 1 of this series, this very special multi-part episode. And thank you so much for listening, for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, I really appreciate it. Please, if I could just ask one more thing, if you could rate and review, if you're listening on the podcast, if you could like, subscribe on YouTube. You don't want to miss the next parts in this series. I don't know specifically when I'm going to be dropping those. I can say they're likely going to be taking place of my typical review episodes that I would be doing. So probably get these out in the next 2 to 3 weeks. I'm hoping to do more than one weekly. So don't hold me to it because we might not do that, but I'm very excited to keep plugging away at this. There's more work for me to do at this point, and I will get everything out to you as soon as I realistically can. But thank you so much for listening. Again, I super appreciate it. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I hope to see you back for more. Thanks.